Hello, this video is going to focus on that party upon two legs, the ghost of Christmas present. Now this is a ghost that symbolises the peace, the generosity, the goodwill to all men that Charles Dickens saw as the true spirit of Christmas. And on his travels with Scrooge, he's going to expose to Scrooge the fact that poverty is no barrier to enjoying the festive period. He's also going to explode or atomise Scrooge's toxic assumptions about poor people. He's also going to expose Scrooge's own contribution to the plight of the poor. And finally, through a glimpse at Fred's house party, he's going to show Scrooge on what he's missing out on. When Scrooge first claps eyes on the ghost of Christmas present, the ghost is described as a jolly giant. Now, the fact that he's so big, this is metaphorical, this is symbolic, and what it represents is the size, the scope, the scale of this guy's generosity of spirit, the scale of merriment that attends him or that attends Christmas. However, in spite of the fact that this ghost practically hemorrhages positivity and goodwill, he can only press pause on the squalor and the misery of Victorian poverty. He can't stop it. In a sense, he can only defer that misery for 24 hours. Do you remember the ghost makes a reference to having about 1,800 brothers? This is a reference to the number of Christmas days there have been since the birth of Christ. So if my maths are correct, this novella was written in 1842. So in a sense, he has 1,841 brothers. There have been 1,841 Christmas days before him. So the life cycle of this ghost, the ghost of Christmas present, who represents that festive period, that festive 24 hours, he only has a life cycle of one day. Now Charles Dickens was a very crafty practitioner of pathetic fallacy, and he uses it very effectively throughout this novel. And he uses it to present the ghost of Christmas present. And of course, pathetic fallacy uses setting or weather to convey mood or character. And when Scrooge pops his head around the door of his chambers and he sees the ghost, the room the ghost appears in is, and here's the quote, hung with living green, gleaming berries glistened, the fire is described as a mighty blaze. So what we've got here is the ghost linked or juxtaposed with light and heat imagery here. Of course, light and heat are life-sustaining properties. This serves to convey the vitality and the warm-hearted nature of this ghost. Moreover, you've got these kind of big hairy heaps of food surrounding him, and that again is entrenching or reinforcing the idea that he's a generous character. There's a generosity of spirit, and underpinning that an urge to be generous and distribute food and wealth more equitably. Now, do you remember early doors in Stave 3, as soon as the ghost takes Scrooge out of the chambers, woomph, at a stroke, all that food vanishes. And I think that's very symbolic, very significant, because it suggests or implies that, you know, the generosity of spirit that characterises Christmas, that's gone, boom, so fast. Soon as Christmas Day's over, that's it. Business as usual, back to misery and squalor and dudes like Scrooge grinding the noses of the poor in the dirt. Besides the pathetic fallacy, Dickens uses details of the ghost's appearance and bits of its dialogue to reveal other aspects of its character, and by extension, Dickens's ideas about Christmas. Let's see, you've got the ghost's sparkling eye, suggestive of the vitality, the merriment that should characterise the festive period. You've got the rusty scabbard, haven't you? Great image that, conveying the idea that Christmas is a time for peace. Peace on earth and goodwill to men. And of course it's rusted over because it's not used during the festive period. You down tools, you stop punching the paint out of each other. What are the details we've got? We've got the bare chest, which he says disdains artifice, which means kind of discourages shows of fakeness. Again, just suggesting that Christmas is a time for genuine shows of joy and pleasure. There's no need for that cool, aloof, too school. There's no need for that cool, aloof, too cool for school mentality. You should just bask in the happiness that Christmas affords. And then you've got the horn of plenty, scattering peace and goodwill amongst the populace. I think it diffuses a few fights, and just blesses with Christmas grace lots of the poor people's dinners. Oh, I think there's a reference as well to his hair being long and free, which captures the idea of letting your hair down, of relaxing and enjoying yourself during Christmas. Then you've got his dialogue. What's one of the first things he booms at Scrooge? Come in and know me better, man. Again, this is an overture of friendship, conveying the warm-hearted nature of this ghost. No surprise, you've got an exclamation mark at the end, which just telegraphs that energy and vitality of the man. One of Scrooge's main assumptions, which the ghost of Christmas Present is very keen to crush, is the idea that happiness and wealth are so tightly joined together. As far as Scrooge is concerned, if you don't have wealth, you can't be happy. Now, the ghost of Christmas Present atomises that preconception, certainly so far as Christmas Day is concerned, because he shows Scrooge images of poor people, people living in grinding poverty, really enjoying themselves at Christmas, celebrating the season and the company of their fellow man. So the ghost teaches Scrooge that wealth and happiness maybe aren't as tightly connected as he imagines. And there's a couple of key lines that beautifully convey this. The first one, early on in Stave 3, is the idea there was nothing very cheerful in the climate or the town, and yet there was an air of cheerfulness abroad. And I love this idea because I think it symbolises the fact that, the reality of people's lives, the climate, the poverty, is enough to get you down. But on that one day, the indefatigable human spirit, the indefatigable Christmas spirit, compels people to go beyond their desperate situation and claw some joy and pleasure out of the day. This idea is echoed by an image when Scrooge is taken to a lighthouse and he sees two old salts having a drink and toasting Christmas. And of the lighthouse, it said that it shed out a ray of brightness on the awful sea. And I think I've got a problem. I see metaphors and symbols everywhere. I think this is symbolic because I think that ray of light of being like a beacon of positivity that shines out regardless of that awful sea, the awful situation of poverty that people find themselves in. This idea of light and hope permeating that existential or spiritual darkness that people in poverty are compelled to endure. As Dickens himself says, towards the end of Stave 3, the spirit stood by poverty and it was rich. At some point in Stave 3, the ghost of Christmas Present and Scrooge rock up at the Cratchit family household. And the Cratchits have got a very warm, happy, energetic family life. And of course, this contrasts sharply with the leaden life that Scrooge lives, that cold, isolated existence of his. And why does the ghost do this? Why does he give us a glimpse into the lives of the Cratchit family? Well, I think one of the reasons is to explode or destroy further Scrooge's preconceptions about the poor. Because, this is not a family without flaws. It said they were scruffy, they weren't very attractive, they were quite hungry. But I'll tell you what, you can never accuse this family of being idle. Cast your mind back to Stave 1, Scrooge says he doesn't like to make idle people merry, suggesting he sees the poor as lazy. And yet here we have Martha, one of the Cratchit daughters, telling us about the joyless, turgid working life that she endures, the long hours, the back-breaking labour. We've also got young Peter Cratchit, who has aspirations of becoming a businessman. So he's very aspirational. He's not some layabout lowlife content to stay at home with his thumb up his bum watching the telly. Not that they had telly back then, but you know what I mean. Scrooge is learning then that if the poor are poor, it's not because of a want or a lack of work ethic. And hobbling round the house on his little crutch is that lovable tyke, Tiny Tim, Bob's son, Bob's crippled son. Why have this small child with a disability? Well, I think this is to convey the idea that the working class that Tiny Tim symbolises are very vulnerable. And it's no coincidence that Tiny Tim, this cipher, this symbol of the working class, is presented as a child, because I think this is Dickens' way of rendering the poor more sympathetic in the eyes of the reader and of Scrooge. Children, of course, have those connotations of innocence, and what that is emphasising to the reader and to Scrooge is the idea that the poor don't deserve the poverty and misery that they endure. The Ghost of Christmas Present tells us, doesn't he, and Scrooge, that if the situation stays the same, Tiny Tim is going to die. And this is a very ominous sign of what the grinding poverty of Victorian England is doing to the poor. It's killing them, it's destroying them. So yeah, one of the reasons why the Ghost of Christmas Present took Scrooge to see the Cratchits was to help present the poor in a more positive light than Scrooge had previously perceived them. But the ghost is a secondary reason for taking Scrooge to see the Cratchits. What he wants to do is to create or provoke a sense of shame in Scrooge and force him to acknowledge his responsibility, his collusion, his contribution to the desperate situation that the Cratchits find themselves in. Bob at one point refers to the meal they've just eaten as a feast, whereas it's obvious to us from phrases like how the meal was eked out with applesauce that this meal barely enough to feed a family of white mice, let alone growing children and adults. Dickens then is using irony by having Scrooge described as the founder of the feast, because this is no feast, but I'll tell you what, Scrooge is certainly the founder of that misery, those paucity or poverty of portions, because of course he pays Bob so little. It's fair to say then that the Ghost of Christmas Present is having a pretty busy night of it. All these lessons that he's hammering into Scrooge. Scrooge has learned that the poor are not responsible for their poverty. Far from it, in fact, it appears that Scrooge himself has a significant role to play in the dire straits of people like the Cratchits. Another thing the ghost goes on to do for Scrooge is to explode or destroy Scrooge's sense of superiority towards the poor. Do you remember in Stave 1, Scrooge was talking about the surplus population, the idea that the poor are surplus requirements and, they'd be doing us all a favour if they died. Scrooge's reasoning then, if you're poor, you're a needless burden on society, you're surplus to requirements. The Ghost of Christmas Present, however, turns that idea on his head. He suggests that this idea of a surplus of population is all relative. If you're going to take a very Christian or moral perspective instead of an economic one, then it appears guys like Scrooge are surplus to requirements. Their toxic greed and selfishness renders them a burden and needless pressure on society. On Christmas Day then, the Cratchits do come across as a genuinely happy family. I mean, they're practically whistling, always looking the bright side of life. They're a very perky bunch. But I would argue that happiness is a fragile thing. And don't forget, this Ghost of Christmas Present can only delay the miseries of their impoverished circumstances for 24 hours. After that, the cruel realities will re-emerge. This is a family that's overworked, underpaid, hungry, supporting a disabled child. And compounding those problems, or facilitating those problems, are men like Scrooge. This ghost then, the Ghost of Christmas Present, is teaching Scrooge that poverty is not a self-inflicted injury. If anybody's got their finger on the trigger, it is Scrooge. Now, what's this rubbish, Mr. Taylor? What the hell has a pub game like darts got to do with the Ghost of Christmas Present? Well, just humour an old man briefly and appreciate this tenuous link. Back in the 80s, there used to be this game show on the telly called Bullseye, based around darts. It's a pretty nasty game show, really, because when you lost, the host Jim Bowen would say, "Oh, just look what you could have won," and these poor contestants who made a pig's ear of the game would have to watch these fantastic holidays and cars that they were never going to get before they were given their BFH, their bus fare home. It was a sadistically delightful game show. I was a big fan. Anywho, it always reminds me of the ghost taking Scrooge to Fred's house party, because Scrooge is saying, "Ooh, just look what you could have won." For the past 2 decades, Scrooge could have been going to Fred's for Christmas and having a fun-packed, joy-filled day of it, rather than mooching around in his own ice-cold quarters, sucking down lukewarm gruel. And at this stage of the stave, we see a real thawing or softening of Scrooge's cold, unfriendly character. Because he's itching to get involved in the games at the party, you really get a sense that the Christmas joy, the goodwill of the Ghost of Christmas Present is starting to penetrate Scrooge's soul. Okay then, time to start summarising the Ghost of Christmas Present. Whoa, 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 you knucklehead. Slow down. I think you've forgotten about the two most potent, chilling characters to emerge in Stave 3, and they're very much connected with the Ghost of Christmas Present. What about those two evil little critters, Ignorance and Want? Well, do you know, Mr. Taylor, that is a ferociously intelligent question. I'm glad you asked. I think these two characters are so commanding a presence, are so compelling and unsettling that they deserve their own video. So there is an accompanying video to go with this one that focuses on Ignorance and Want. Okay then, conclusions. The Ghost of Christmas Present symbolises or personifies Dickens's ideas about Christmas. Namely that it's a time for peace, goodwill and generosity. Generosity of spirit, kind of kindliness and friendliness, but also a generosity in the terms of material goods, sharing food and wealth that little bit more fairly or equitably. Through Scrooge's visits with the ghost to the Cratchit family, the ghost explodes or undermines Scrooge's prejudices, his preconceptions about the poor. He also exposes, does this ghost, Scrooge's own shameful contribution to the plight of the poor, the poverty of others. Finally, this is a ghost that opens Scrooge's eyes to the joy that Christmas can bring even the poorest in society, a joy that Scrooge is missing out on. And that's a lot, folks. Time, gentlemen, please. The Ghost of Christmas Present, done and dusted. Now sniff out my accompanying video on those two chilling characters, Ignorance and Want, that the Ghost of Christmas Present gives sanctuary to for Christmas Day before unleashing them once again upon the world.